Growing up, I always knew where I stood in the family hierarchy. There was Jason, the golden boy, and then there was me, Nancy, the one who existed in the peripherals of our parents' proud gazes. Jason was everything a parent could dream of. His looks could have landed him on magazine covers, and his wit and charm made him the apple of our parents' eyes. "Look at him, Nancy," Dad would often say, his eyes following Jason as he moved with an effortless grace. "Your brother's going to make history. He's got that spark, you know?" I'd nod, forcing a smile, my voice a mere whisper in the shadow of Jason's brilliance. "Yeah, he's amazing." Mom was no less enamored. Dinner conversations always centered around Jason's accomplishments. "Did you hear about Jason's new achievement, Nancy?" she'd start, her voice tinged with excitement. "He's top of his class again. A real genius, our boy." "That's great," I'd respond, my words often drowned out by the next wave of praises for Jason. My own achievements, though decent, never seemed to make waves. They were just gentle ripples that faded quickly against the shore of Jason's triumphs. It wasn't that they didn't love me or care for me. It was just that Jason's light was blinding, casting a long shadow where I stood, quietly observing, quietly learning. I remember one evening, trying to share a piece of my world. "I won the school art contest today," I murmured, hoping for a sliver of their attention. "That's nice, dear," Mom replied, her smile sincere, but fleeting. "Could you help set the table?" The conversation swiftly shifted back to Jason's recent debate victory. I did what I always did, I helped set the table, my mind wandering to places where my achievements weren't just background noise. In those quiet moments, when the house hummed with the tales of Jason's adventures and dreams, I found my own space, my own peace. It wasn't that I didn't have dreams or aspirations. It was just that mine didn't shine as brightly in the family spotlight. "Nancy, you know we're proud of you too, right?" Dad once said, his voice softer, as if he sensed the unspoken feelings that hung like delicate cobwebs in our conversations. "I know, Dad," I replied, my voice steady, my resolve clearer than ever. "I'm proud of me too." And in that moment, I realized it. Being in the shadows wasn't a curse. It was a blessing in disguise. It was where I found my strength, my resolve, and my path. A path not illuminated by the glaring lights of expectation, but one that was lit by the steady glow of self-belief. The day Jason's world came crashing down, it started like any other. Mom was bustling around the kitchen, Dad was buried in the morning paper, and I was just about to leave for work. Then the phone rang, a sharp, shrill sound that seemed to slice through the normalcy of our morning. Mom answered, her usual cheery hello faltering as the words on the other end of the line sunk in. I could see her face drain of color, her hand clutching the phone like a lifeline. What are you saying?" she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "My Jason? That can't be." Dad and I exchanged worried glances, the air thick with tension. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor, and made his way to Mom. "Honey, what is it? What's happened?" It was like watching a dam break. The words poured out of Mom, each one heavier, more unbelievable than the last. "It's Jason, he's been arrested. They're saying he used his looks, his charm, to scam women out of their money." The room spun, the news hitting us like a physical blow. Jason, our golden boy, the pride of our family, a criminal? It didn't add up, it couldn't. But the weight of the truth was undeniable, pressing down on us, suffocating. Dad slumped back into his chair, his face the picture of defeat. How did we not see? All this time, we thought he was our perfect son, but we were blind. I stood there, frozen, the familiar feeling of being in the background now a twisted comfort. But this time, the background was a stage for a tragedy, a play where our family was coming apart at the seams. Mom was sobbing now, her body racked with guilt and disbelief. We failed him, we spoiled him. Gave him everything, never questioning, never doubting. And now, look what he's done. Her words were like bitter pills, hard to swallow. We had all played our parts in this, in one way or another. Our silence, our blind adoration, they had fueled Jason's fall, just as much as his own actions. I moved closer, my own shock giving way to a need to hold my family together. Mom, Dad, this is hard. It's going to be hard. But we need to face it, deal with it. We can't let this break us. Dad looked up, his eyes meeting mine, a silent understanding passing between us. Nancy's right. We need to be strong, now more than ever. We sat there, the three of us, bound by blood and a shared heartache. The golden image of Jason, the one we had all held on to, had shattered. Sitting at the old, creaky kitchen table that had witnessed so many family dramas, the air felt different, almost electric with change. Mom and Dad had called me over, their faces solemn, a stark contrast to the usual casual weekend dinners. Nancy, we need to talk, Dad began, his voice unsteady. He was a man of few words, so the seriousness in his tone immediately set off alarms in my head. Mom reached across the table, her hand trembling slightly as she took mine. Honey, your father and I have been doing a lot of thinking. About the past, about how we treated you and Jason. I felt a knot forming in my stomach. Discussions about Jason usually meant trouble or disappointment. But this felt different. There was a sense of confession in the air, a need for redemption. We realized we weren't fair to you, Nancy, Dad continued, his eyes not meeting mine. We were so caught up in your brother's life, his successes, and, later, his mistakes. We overlooked you, the steady, strong heart of this family. Mom nodded, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. We're so sorry, sweetheart. We can't change the past, but we want to make things right, starting now. We've put aside some money for you, for your education, for your future. It's not just an investment, it's our way of saying we see you, Nancy. We always should have. The words washed over me, a mix of emotion swirling inside. Part of me wanted to brush it off, to maintain the sturdy, independent facade I'd built over the years. But another part, a softer, more vulnerable part, felt seen for the first time in a long while. Mom, Dad, I don't know what to say. I stammered, the walls I'd carefully constructed around my heart starting to crumble. Say you'll accept it, Nancy. Say you'll let us do this one thing right, Mom urged, her voice thick with emotion. So, I accepted, not just the money, but the olive branch they were extending. College was a whirlwind of late-night study sessions and early morning classes, but every challenge, every triumph felt doubly sweet. It was my journey, but it was also our journey, a silent pact between my parents and me to mend the frayed edges of our family tapestry. Graduation day was a scene I'd replay in my mind for years to come. Mom and Dad in the audience, their applause drowning out the rest, their faces alight with pride, not just in my achievements, but in our collective healing. Madam Wilson, my students would greet me each day as I entered the classroom of the prestigious private school where I taught. My heart would swell with pride, not just for the title, but for the journey it represented. Life found a new rhythm, a comforting routine of teaching, grading, and quiet evenings in my rented apartment. The savings account for my own place grew slowly but steadily, a testament to my perseverance and independence. During weekend dinners at Mom and Dad's, the conversation flowed more freely, the laughter more genuine. We were rediscovering each other, learning the contours of our lives beyond the shadow of Jason's tumultuous legacy. You're really making a difference, Nancy, Dad would say, his eyes shining with sincerity. Those kids, they're lucky to have you. And we're lucky to have you, honey, Mom would add, passing me another serving of her famous lasagna. You brought so much light into our lives, especially when things seemed the darkest. And as for Jason, he was like a distant echo, a memory that had lost its sharpness over time. His name rarely crossed our lips, and when it did, it was met with a somber acknowledgement and a quick shift to brighter topics. Life has a way of throwing punches when you least expect it. That's what happened the day I lost Dad. It was a day like any other until it wasn't. The phone rang, shattering the calm of my morning routine. It was Mom, and the tremble in her voice told me something was terribly wrong before she even spoke. "Nancy, it's your dad," she said, each word soaked in grief. He's had a heart attack. He's gone, Nancy, he's gone." The world stopped. Just like that. Dad, the steady rock of our family, the quiet force that held us together, was gone. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All I could do was listen to Mom's sobs on the other end of the line. "I need you, Nancy. Please, I need you here," she pleaded, her voice a lifeline in the midst of my own swirling despair. "I'm coming, Mom. I'm coming right now," I managed to say, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. The drive to my parents' house was a blur. My mind replayed a million memories, each one a sharp reminder of what we'd lost. Mom was a wreck when I got there, her tears a silent testament to the love she'd shared with Dad for all those years. "We didn't even get to say goodbye, Nancy," she cried, her words breaking on each sob. "He was fine last night, and now he's just gone." I held her, two pieces of a puzzle, trying to hold each other together. There were no words, no comfort to be found in the usual platitudes. So, we just stood there, holding on to each other, the silence speaking volumes. The days that followed were a haze of arrangements and condolences. Relatives and friends came and went, each one trying to offer some solace, some sense of normalcy in the face of our raw grief. "I can't believe he's gone, Nancy," Aunt Linda said, her eyes red from crying. "Your dad was such a good man, a real pillar of the community." I nodded, the lump in my throat making it hard to speak. "He was the best, Aunt Linda. The best." And then there was the matter of Jason. The brother who'd cast such a long shadow over our lives was nowhere to be found. Mom, despite everything, had reached out to him, a mother's love overcoming even the deepest hurt. "He didn't even care, Nancy," she told me, her voice hollow. "He just asked about money, about inheritance. As if your dad's life was just some transaction." The anger that flared within me was fierce and protective. "Forget him, Mom. He made his choices. We're better off without him." The funeral was a quiet affair, just a few close friends and family. The absence of my brother was a silent scream in the midst of our mourning, a final proof of the divide that had grown between us. After everyone else had left, Mom and I stood by Dad's grave, the finality of it all hitting us like a physical force. "He loved you so much, Nancy," Mom said, her hand gripping mine. "We both did. We both do." I squeezed her hand back, the gesture a promise, a vow. "I know, Mom. And I love you. We'll get through this. Together." Life was different after that. The house felt emptier, the conversations quieter. But in that quiet, there was also a sense of unity, of two people coming together, sharing a loss, and somehow finding a way to keep moving forward. Life after Dad's passing was like walking through a fog. Me and Mom, we were trying to pick up the pieces, make sense of a world that had tilted on its axis. That's when the greed we thought we'd left behind came knocking. I started noticing it, subtle at first. Mom would get these phone calls, her face turning all shades of worry as soon as she saw the caller ID. She'd step into the other room, her whisper seeping through the walls, laced with tension and unease. "Mom, what's going on? Who keeps calling?" I finally asked one evening, unable to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It was like watching a dam break. Mom's facade crumbled, the truth pouring out in a torrent of pent-up fears and guilt. "It's Jason," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's been calling, asking for money. I've been sending it to him, Nancy. I didn't want to worry you." My heart sank, a mix of anger and disbelief churning inside me. Jason? After all this time, after everything, he has the nerve to ask for money? Mom nodded, her eyes clouded with regret. I know it's wrong. But he's my son, Nancy. I couldn't just turn him away, not completely. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the storm inside me. Mom, we can't do this. We can't let him bleed us dry. He didn't even care enough to come to Dad's funeral. His greed, it's got no end. The decision was made. Next time Jason called, we'd put an end to it, once and for all. The phone rang, right on cue, Mom's hand shaking as she answered. "Jason, listen," she started, her voice stronger than I'd heard in a long time. "I can't do this anymore. There's no more money. You need to figure things out on your own." The response was a barrage of insults and threats, Jason's voice a venomous hiss spitting through the phone. But Mom stood her ground, her resolve a newfound armor against his greed. After she hung up, the silence that followed was heavy, loaded with the weight of a severed tie, a final break from the son who'd chosen his path, a path of selfishness and greed. Just when we thought we'd weathered the worst of the storm, life hit us with another cruel blow. Mom, she'd been the glue holding me together after Dad passed, but her heart, it seemed, was more fragile than we knew. I found her that morning, peaceful like she was just sleeping. But I knew, the silence in the house screamed it, she was gone. The pain, the loss, it was like a punch to the gut, knocking the wind right out of me. I called Aunt Linda, my voice a shaky whisper, "Aunt Linda, it's Mom, she's passed away." The line went quiet, the kind of silence that's heavy with unspoken words. "Oh, Nancy," she finally said, her voice thick. "I'm so sorry. Your mom, she was one of the good ones." The days that followed were a blur. There were arrangements to be made, people to call. The same people who'd just offered their condolences for Dad were back, their faces etched with shock and sympathy. I was running on autopilot, doing what needed to be done, but inside, I was screaming. How much loss can one person take? First Dad, then the betrayal of cutting ties with Jason, and now Mom. The funeral was a quiet affair, just close friends and family, the air thick with grief and whispered prayers. And once again, the gaping absence of Jason was like a dark cloud, a stark reminder of the choices he'd made, the family he'd turned his back on. After everyone else had left, I stood there alone, the weight of my new reality pressing down on me. Aunt Linda came over, her hand gentle on my shoulder. "Nancy, you're not alone in this," she said, her voice firm. "You've got family, people who love you. And your parents, they'd be so proud of you, of the woman you've become." Her words, meant to comfort, were a small light in the darkness. But the path ahead was mine to walk alone, a road paved with memories and what-ifs. The house, once filled with the laughter and warmth of a family, now echoed with silence, each room a reminder of what had been, of what was lost. But in that silence, there was also space to breathe, to grieve, and eventually, to heal. The grief was still raw, the loss of Mom like a wound that refused to heal. That's when Jason decided to make his grand return, not with condolences or apologies, but with demands and arrogance. I heard the knock, loud and impatient, echoing through the empty halls of the house that had once been filled with love and laughter. I opened the door, and there he stood, my brother Jason, looking every bit the part of the prodigal son, except there was no remorse in his eyes, just greed and entitlement. "Nancy, long time no see," he said, his voice dripping with a false cheerfulness that didn't reach his eyes. Beside him was his wife, her makeup as bold as her husband's audacity. "Jason," I replied, my voice steady, despite the storm of emotions inside me. "What are you doing here?" He smirked, a look that made my skin crawl. "Well, sis, now that the old folks are gone, I figured it's time to settle the family affairs. Starting with this house." His words hung in the air, heavy with implications. His wife, standing there like a vulture waiting for its share, chimed in. "Yeah, sweetie, why don't you just pack up your things and make it easier for everyone?" I felt a flare of anger, hot and fierce. "This is my parents' house, my home. You have no right to barge in here and make demands." Jason's smirk widened. "Oh, come on, Nancy. We all know Mom and Dad would have wanted me to have this place. I'm the eldest, after all." I shook my head, disbelief and anger mingling in a potent mix. "You have some nerve, Jason. You didn't even bother to show up for their funerals, and now you just waltz in here expecting to take everything?" His wife snorted, her voice sharp and cutting. Look, let's not make this harder than it has to be. You've had your time here, now it's our turn. We'll be back in 3 days to move in. I suggest you're not here when we do. They turned to leave, their laughter a bitter sound that echoed in the empty halls of my parents' house. I stood there, rooted to the spot, a mixture of grief, rage, and disbelief coursing through me. But as the door closed behind them, a resolve settled in my heart. This was not just a house, it was my heritage, my parents' legacy. I wouldn't let Jason and his greed tarnish their memory, wouldn't let him destroy what they had built with love and sacrifice. I picked up the phone, my fingers dialing the number of Aunt Linda, Mom's lifelong friend and confidant. Aunt Linda, it's Nancy. I need your help. Jason's back, and he's after the house. Her voice, strong and steady, was a comfort in the storm. Don't you worry, Nancy. I'll be right over. We'll sort this out, you and me. We won't let him get away with this. As I hung up the phone, a sense of determination took hold. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to fight, not just for the house, but for the dignity and memory of my parents. The air was tense as Aunt Linda and I sat in the living room, waiting. We knew they were coming, the 3-day ultimatum Jason had given was up. When the sound of a car pulling into the driveway reached our ears, we exchanged a glance, a silent agreement that we were in this together, come what may. The knock on the door was forceful, demanding. I took a deep breath, steadied my nerves, and opened it. There stood Jason and his wife, their expressions a mix of arrogance and impatience. Time's up, Nancy, Jason said, his voice cold. Pack your things and get out. This house is ours now. His wife sneered, adding, yeah, you heard him. Move it, or we'll make you. Aunt Linda stood up, her presence commanding, despite her age. Jason, you ungrateful man, she said, her voice sharp as a knife. You think you can just waltz in here and take everything? You think that's what your mother would have wanted? Jason's face twisted into a sneer. And what would you know about it, huh? You're just her nosy sister. Aunt Linda's laugh was bitter, filled with years of watching a family torn apart by greed. I know more than you think. Your mother made me the executor of her will. She knew exactly what kind of man you'd become. She waved an envelope in front of Jason's face. He snatched it from her hands, tearing it open with a viciousness that made my blood run cold. Aunt Linda's laughter filled the room again, her eyes twinkling with a mix of triumph and sadness. Oh, Jason, you really thought you could bully your way into a fortune? That was just a copy. The original is safe with me, and another copy with the notary. Your mother's wishes are clear and legally binding. She took another copy of the will from her pocket, reading aloud the words that sealed Jason's fate. The house, 200 grand, it was all mine, a final gift from a mother. Jason's anger erupted like a volcano, his words a stream of venom and desperation. This is a joke, right? He stammered. Everything to Nancy? And all I get is a Bible? You can't do this to me. That's my money, my house. You have to share it. But I stood firm, my resolve hardened by years of being overlooked and underestimated. This is Mom's will, Jason. Her final decision. And I'm honoring it, whether you like it or not. His wife pulled at his arm, her eyes darting nervously. Let's just go, Jason. This isn't worth it. But Jason was beyond reason, beyond understanding. It took the threat of calling the police to finally make them leave, their retreat a mix of anger and disbelief. As they drove away, Aunt Linda turned to me, a gentle smile on her face. Your parents would be proud, Nancy. You stood your ground. I looked around the house, my house now, feeling the weight of my parents' legacy, of the responsibility that came with it. I knew then what I wanted: a family of my own, children to love and guide, to raise with the same strength and integrity that had gotten me through the toughest of times. Life had come full circle, and as I stood there, in the home that had seen so much joy and pain, I was ready for the future, ready to build a legacy of my own, one filled with love, fairness, and the quiet strength that had been my companion through it all.